I liquidated my legacy to save my husband's life. 40 years of kneading dough at the Golden Crust, sold for $850,000, just to pay for Steven's experimental heart surgery. When he woke up, healthy and flushed with life, he didn't thank me. He evicted me. He told me his new heart needed youthful energy, specifically the energy of his 28-year-old physical therapist. My own son, Caleb, didn't stop him, he held the door open. 2 months later, I was sleeping under a bridge in a storm, clutching my last $40, when I saw a little girl shivering in the dark. I didn't save myself. I bought her a hot meal instead. Before we walk this dark road together, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The Golden Crust wasn't just a building with an oven. It was a cathedral of flour and heat, and I was its high priestess. For 40 years, I woke up at 3 in the morning, before the streetlights buzzed off, to feed the mother. That's what I called my sourdough starter, a bubbling, living culture I'd kept alive since the Reagan administration. It smelled like sour apples and old rain. It was the soul of the business, and frankly, the only thing in my life that grew stronger the more I gave to it. Steven, on the other hand, was a different kind of investment. He was the front-of-house charm, the man who shook hands and took credit for the croissants while I nursed burns on my forearms in the back. I didn't mind. I thought that was the deal. I provided the substance, he provided the shine. We were a team, or so I told myself while I kneaded exhaustion into every loaf. Then came the diagnosis. It wasn't a blockage or a murmur. It was a rare degenerative valve condition, the kind that insurance companies look at and laugh. The specialist, Dr. Aris, put it bluntly, Steven needed an experimental reconstruction in Zurich, or he would be dead in 6 months. The price tag was $450,000. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just did the math. My bakery, my life's work, sat on prime real estate. Developers had been circling for years like sharks smelling blood in the water. I looked at Steven, pale and trembling in the paper gown, and the decision made itself. I wasn't just a baker, I was a wife. And wives, I had been taught, sacrifice. It is the silent clause in the contract. My son, Caleb, didn't mourn the loss of the business that had paid for his private school and his failed startups. He sat at our kitchen table, tapping away on his calculator app. It's a no-brainer, Mom, he said, his eyes not on me, but on the potential yield. The developer offered $850,000. That covers the surgery, the travel, the rehab, and leaves a massive cushion. We have to liquidate. Dad deserves this. He used the word "we" freely, though he had never woken up at 3 in the morning to punch down dough. He spoke about liquidating my legacy as if he were taking out the trash. I should have seen the greed in his eyes then, the way he licked his lips when he said, cushion. But I was too busy trying to be the savior. I signed the papers. I handed over the keys to a man in a polyester suit who planned to turn my bakery into a boutique gym. The only thing I kept was a small mason jar of the mother, tucked into my purse like a secret. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself Steven was worth it. I normalized the cruelty of erasing myself to keep him whole. The money hit the account on a Tuesday. By Thursday, we were on a plane to Zurich. I held Steven's hand as they wheeled him into the operating theater. He looked at me with teary eyes and said, "I'll make this up to you, Cynthia." I swear. He lied. The recovery was miraculous. Steven didn't just survive, he bloomed. His cheeks turned pink, his step lightened, and for a few weeks, I allowed myself to believe that the sacrifice was worth it. I cooked him bone broth and massaged his legs. I was the nurse, the chef, and the cheerleader. But as his strength returned, so did his critical eye. He started small. He complained that the apartment I rented while he recovered smelled like old people. He mentioned that my hair had gone completely gray during the ordeal, and not in a distinguished way. He told me I shuffled when I walked. I absorbed it all. I absorbed it because for 40 years, I had been trained to accept these microdoses of cruelty. It's a trap, you see. You think if you can just tolerate the small insults, the forgotten anniversaries, the snide comments about your weight, the way he rolled his eyes when you spoke, that you can prevent the big explosion. You normalize the poison until you don't even taste it anymore. I thought I was being a good wife by enduring it. I didn't realize I was just teaching him that I had no boundaries he couldn't cross. Then came Chloe. She was 28, a physical therapist with a smile that showed too much gum and legs that went on for days. Steven brought her home on a Tuesday. Chloe is moving in, he said, standing in the middle of the living room I paid for. She's going to help with my long-term mobility. I looked at the single-bedroom door. Where is she going to sleep? Steven didn't look at the floor. He looked right at me, and his eyes were cold and clear. In the bedroom, Cynthia. With me. The air left the room. I don't understand. I have a new heart, he said, tapping his chest. I have a second chance at life. I can't waste it being dragged down by your aging energy. You're a reminder of the sickness. Chloe is vitality. I need vitality. He wasn't asking for a divorce. He was evicting me. He handed me a check for $5,000, drawn from the account that held the bakery money. This should get you set up somewhere else. Be out by tonight. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a vase. I went to the fridge and took out the mason jar of sourdough starter. It was the only thing in that apartment that had any integrity. I packed a suitcase. I walked out past Chloe, who was already rearranging the throw pillows. I went to Caleb's apartment. He opened the door, saw the suitcase, and didn't step back to let me in. Dad called, he said, blocking the entrance. I have nowhere to go, Caleb. He kicked me out. Caleb sighed, scratching the back of his neck. Look, Mom, Dad's been through a lot. He needs to explore this new chapter. And honestly, your vibe right now. It's really depressing. I can't have that energy here. I'm trying to launch a podcast. I paid for this apartment, I said, my voice flat. The deposit. The first 6 months. That was a gift, he countered quickly. You can't hold gifts over people's heads. It's toxic. He closed the door. I stood in the hallway, holding my 40-year-old yeast culture, and realized I was entirely alone. 2 months later, the temperature dropped to 34 degrees. I was living in an underpass near the shipping docks, a concrete hollow that smelled of diesel and brine. The storm of the century was battering the coast, turning the streets into rivers of black sludge. I had exactly $40 in my pocket. It was enough for 2 nights at a hostel, or enough to eat for a week if I was careful. I was huddled against a pillar, trying to keep the wind from cutting through my coat, when I saw her. She was a tiny thing, maybe 8 years old, curled into a ball behind a dumpster. She was soaked through, shaking so violently her teeth clicked together like dice. She wore a thin dress that might have been yellow once, but was now gray with filth. I looked around. No parents. No police. Just the storm and the dark. I walked over. She flinched when I got close, her eyes wide and terrified. She didn't make a sound. She didn't scream. She just stared at me with a silence that was louder than the thunder. I'm not going to hurt you, I said, my voice raspy from disuse. Are you hungry? She didn't answer. She just looked at my pocket, where I had a half-eaten granola bar. I had a choice. I could keep walking. I could go to the hostel, get a warm bed, and save myself. $40 was a fortune down here. It was survival. But I looked at her hands, blue with cold, and I remembered the heat of my ovens. I remembered the smell of rising dough. I wasn't a beggar. I was a feeder. That was who I was. I took her hand. It was like holding a piece of ice. I led her to a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. The lights were harsh, but it was warm. I sat her in a booth and ordered the biggest bowl of chicken noodle soup they had. Then, I saw the display case. Cinnamon rolls. Huge, spiraled, covered in white icing. They weren't my recipe, mine used cardamom and orange zest, but they were warm. One of those, too, I told the waitress. That meal cost me $28. I had $12 left. I watched the girl eat. She devoured the soup, but when the cinnamon roll arrived, she stopped. She leaned in and smelled it. She closed her eyes. "Bun," she whispered. It was the first sound she had made. It was a raspy, broken little word, but it was there. She looked at me, and for a second, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else. Gratitude. I didn't know then that the 17 black SUVs were already grid-searching the city. I didn't know that this cinnamon roll was the most expensive investment I would ever make. I just knew she was cold, and I had bread. For 3 days, we were ghosts. We moved between the 24-hour laundromat and the back booth of the diner, surviving on the grace of overworked waitresses and the warmth of dryer vents. Harper didn't speak, but she shadowed me like a second heartbeat. She held on to the hem of my coat with a grip that turned her knuckles white. I told her stories about the bakery, about the way flour hangs in the air like gold dust at sunrise. I told her about the mother, the yeast culture I kept in a jar in my pocket, explaining that it was alive, that it was waiting to rise again. I think she understood. We were both waiting to rise. Then came the engines. It wasn't a siren, it was a low, vibrating hum that you felt in your teeth before you heard it. We were sitting on a park bench, sharing a split pea soup, when the street suddenly filled with black SUVs. 17 of them. They didn't park, they swarmed. They cut off the intersections, boxing us in with military precision. I stood up, putting Harper behind me. I had a plastic spoon in my hand. It was ridiculous, but I was ready to use it. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost more than my bakery, and his face was a mask of terrified exhaustion. He looked at me, then he looked past me. "Harper," he choked out. The little girl behind me let go of my coat. She didn't run at first. She walked, trembling, until he dropped to his knees on the pavement, ruining his trousers without a second thought. Then she collided with him. I watched a titan of industry weep into his daughter's dirty hair. He looked up at me. His eyes were gray and sharp, like cut steel. "Did you hurt her?" I didn't flinch. "I fed her. She likes cinnamon rolls. And she doesn't like the dark." Harper pulled back from him. She pointed at me, then at the bakery box on the bench. She looked her father in the eye and spoke her second word. "Safe," she whispered. That word changed my tax bracket. His name was Alexander, and he didn't just own a company, he owned the logistics grid that moved half the country's freight. He didn't ask if I wanted a ride. He opened the door to his car and waited. We drove to a glass fortress on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was a house made of sharp angles and cold surfaces, beautiful and intimidating. But when I walked in, clutching my jar of sourdough starter, Alexander didn't send me to the servants' quarters. He sat me at a table made of reclaimed walnut and poured me a glass of water himself. "I ran a background check on you while we were in the car," he said. He placed a folder on the table. It wasn't a threat, it was a report. Cynthia Vance. Former owner of the Golden Crust. Sold 4 months ago for $850,000. I nodded. To pay for my husband's heart. Alexander opened the folder. He slid a piece of paper toward me. It was a forensic accounting sheet. The surgery in Zurich cost $450,000, Cynthia. Travel and rehab were another $50,000. That leaves $350,000 unaccounted for. I stared at the numbers. No. That's not right. Stephen said the money was gone. He said the medical bills ate it all. Stephen lied, Alexander said, his voice devoid of pity, replaced by cold anger on my behalf. He didn't just evict you to bring in his mistress. He evicted you to hide the theft. He transferred $200,000 to a private account for lifestyle maintenance, essentially, buying a Porsche and funding Chloe's wardrobe. And the other $150,000. He pointed to a name on the spreadsheet. Caleb Vance. Your son, Alexander said. He used his share to pay off gambling debts to a loan shark in Vegas. He pushed for the sale of your bakery not to save his father, but to save his own kneecaps. The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I looked at the paper. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, cold click in my chest, like a lock snapping shut. The grief I had been carrying for months simply evaporated. Grief is for things you lose. I hadn't lost my family, I had been trafficked by them. They aren't my family, I said. It wasn't a question. They are a bad investment, I just wrote off. Alexander closed the folder. Correct. Now, what do you want to do about it? 2 weeks later, the gatecrashers arrived. They didn't look like victors anymore. Stephen's youthful vitality was looking ragged. His new Porsche had been repossessed 3 days prior. Alexander's legal team had frozen the accounts based on evidence of fraud before the ink was dry on the subpoena. Caleb looked even worse. He was pale, sweating, wearing a suit that hadn't been dry cleaned in a month. They showed up at the front gate of Alexander's estate, demanding to see me. They told the intercom security that I was a confused old woman who had been brainwashed by a billionaire. Alexander offered to have security remove them. No, I said. I picked up my jar of sourdough starter. It was bubbling, alive, and hungry. I'll handle this. I met them at the gate. I was wearing a tailored suit Alexander's stylist had picked out, but I wasn't wearing it for them. I was wearing it because it fit. Cynthia. Stephen shouted through the bars. He tried to look authoritative, but he just looked desperate. Thank God. This guy, he's crazy. He froze my accounts. You need to tell him to stop. We're married. That money is community property. Caleb chimed in, his voice cracking. Mom, please. You have to talk to him. These guys in Vegas, they don't play. You have to help me. I looked at them. I looked at the husband who traded me for a physical therapist. I looked at the son who sold my legacy to pay for his addiction. I baked bread for 40 years, I said, my voice steady. You learn to smell when something is rotten before you even open the oven. You too. You're mold. I slid a manila envelope through the bars. It wasn't money. It was a copy of the forensic audit Alexander had prepared, along with a restraining order and a notice of pending criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. Mom. Caleb grabbed the bars. You can't do this. I'm your son. No, I said. I held up the jar of yeast. This is my child. I fed this every day for 40 years. It never lied to me. It never stole from me. It yielded exactly what I put into it. You are a deficit. Stephen tried to play the heart card. He clutched his chest. Cynthia, the stress, my heart. Your heart is fine, Stephen, I said. It cost me $800,000. It should be in perfect working order. Use it to walk back to town. I turned around. I didn't watch them leave. I walked back up the driveway, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. The ending wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a vacation. It was an opening. Alexander offered me a life of leisure. He offered me a guest house and a pension for saving Harper. I declined. I told him I wasn't done working, I was just done working for people who didn't appreciate the bread. We opened the Phoenix Kitchen 3 months later. It wasn't a boutique bakery. It was a massive, industrial space in the heart of the city, funded by Alexander's Angel Logistics division. We didn't hire culinary school graduates. We hired women from the shelters. We hired the invisible women, the ones over 50 who had been discarded by husbands, by bosses, by society. I stood in the center of the kitchen on opening day. The air smelled of rosemary and hot yeast. Harper was there, wearing a customized apron, helping me dust flour onto the workbenches. She spoke now, full sentences, loud and bright. I looked at the women working the ovens. I saw their scars. I saw their fear. And I saw the moment their shoulders dropped when they realized they were safe here. This is the justice of the sower. Revenge isn't burning down the old field. It's planting a new one that is so lush, so vibrant, and so necessary that the old weeds simply starve for lack of attention. Stephen and Caleb were starving somewhere, fighting over scraps. I was here, feeding the city. I took the lid off the jar. I poured a portion of the 40-year-old mother into the massive mixing bowl. It bubbled up to meet the fresh flour, a handshake between the past and the future. To the woman sitting in the dark right now, reading this on a phone screen, you're afraid to turn up too bright, you think you are buried. You think the dirt is the end. But you are a seed. You are just being planted. The rain that is drowning you right now. It is the water you need to grow. Don't wait for them to apologize. They won't. Don't wait for them to see your value. They can't. Take your starter. Take your soul. And build your own kitchen. If you've ever had to restart your life from scratch, type "I am rising" in the comments. Let's show the world how many of us there are. Share this story if you believe in second acts.